away, sister. The stench of the forge.
Forget the movies. Forget the image of the muscular blacksmith, sweat glistening, heroically swinging a hammer in the flickering firelight. That is a romantic lie. The truth is, if you were born a blacksmith in the Middle Ages, you weren't given a career. You were handed a death sentence, executed slowly over 40 years. Your body would be destroyed by 30. Your lungs would be as black as coal, and society would see you as a necessary evil, a filthy creature they both despised and depended on. This is not a story of glory. This is a story of survival. And before we peel back this history soaked in sweat and soot, ask yourself, what could turn a 7-year-old boy who couldn't even read or write into a 40-year-old invalid, coughing up blood and waiting to die? The answer is more terrifying than you think. Your journey begins not with a choice, but with an imposition. You were born into the smell of iron. Your father was a blacksmith, and his father before him. This chain of inheritance was stronger than any chain your family ever forged. There was no following your passion or discovering yourself. The moment you were stable enough not to fall into the forge fire, your destiny was sealed not with ink, but with hot iron. Your childhood ended on a winter morning when you were 8 years old. While other children were still chasing chickens or playing with wooden dolls, you were handed your first hammer. It was heavy. Your father, the man with the permanently bent back and claw-like hands, looked at you with a mixture of pride and pity. He was proud because the tradition continued. He pitied you because he knew exactly the monster he was throwing you to. The first lesson wasn't technique. The first lesson was pain. Your hands blistered, burst, and blistered again, all within a few hours. Your arms screamed with fatigue. Your eyes watered, not from crying, but from the coal smoke and flying metal fragments. You coughed, a dry, hacking cough, signaling 30 years of breathing toxic air. Your father just nodded. You'll get used to it. And you did. You got used to being burned. You got used to hot iron shards hitting your hands. You got used to the heavy hammer slipping, crushing your toe. Getting used to it was just another word for dying slowly. The workshop wasn't a creative space. It was a cave. Dark, cramped, the air thick with the sour stench of sweat, burning coal, and the metallic tang of iron. The forge was just a pile of stones, and the bellows were your first nightmare. You, the weakest, spent your first 3 years as nothing but a living air pump, pulling and pushing that wooden lever thousands of times a day, until your shoulder felt like it was dislocating. The tools were a deadly joke. Hammers with loose handles, tongs that didn't grip, sending hot iron flying. Where did you sleep? In a corner of the workshop, on a pile of straw and rags, right next to the forge. The fire was never allowed to go out. Your job was to wake up every few hours to bank the coals, ensuring it didn't die. You slept to the hiss of the fire, the wheezing breath of your father, and your own stench. That smell clung to you like a second skin. Clothes, hair, skin, everything reeked. The other children in the village called you Sootface. They held their noses when you passed. You were isolated, marked as different, before you even knew what a beard was. You learned by watching, imitating, and enduring. There were no books. Every mistake was paid for in blood and skin. Dropped a piece of iron, a new scar on your leg, swung the hammer wrong, a purple thumbnail. The summer heat turned that cave into a literal furnace, but the work could not stop. You watched your father cough, a deep, rattling cough, hacking up black phlegm. You saw his hands, permanently curved, unable to straighten. That was your future, on living display. You survived those 7 years of hell, and when you turned 15, you were free. But this freedom was a new curse. You became a journeyman, a wanderer. Becoming a journeyman sounds romantic, like an adventure. The reality? You were a homeless person, with a skill set. You carried your few personal tools, a hammer, a few tongs, and a worn leather sack, walking from village to village, begging for work. You belonged nowhere. You walked into a new workshop, and immediately you were the enemy. The local smiths stared at you, suspecting you were there to steal their work. You meet Klaus. He's a large local blacksmith, with small eyes and a sneer. He sees you, younger, perhaps faster, and he hates you. He'll give you the worst coal, the brittle iron that's easy to break. He'll accidentally spill water in your work area. You have to work while also watching your back for men like Klaus. This was a lesson your father didn't teach you. Professional jealousy. Where did you live? Certainly not in the master's house. You rented a corner of the floor in a filthy tavern, sleeping alongside drunks and vagabonds. The smell of stale beer, vomit, and unwashed bodies hit you in the face. Bedbugs bit you every night. Your food was moldy bread and a thin soup they called stew, but it was mostly water. Meat was a luxury. Your body, already strained, began to suffer from malnutrition. Your teeth loosened. Your skin turned a grayish pale. The loneliness now was worse than the isolation of childhood. You worked all day next to other men, but had no friends. Only colleagues, and they were rivals. You had no family. No one to talk to. You moved constantly. Any relationship you just started was severed. Your skills improved, but the price was a piece of your humanity. You learned to work with steel, to forge weapons, but you also learned to be callous and unfeeling. Have you ever felt so alone, surrounded by the sound of people but seen by no one? You looked at the beautiful houses of the merchants, and you dreamed of one day. One day you'd have your own shop. One day you'd be master. That was the only dream that kept you going. After 10 years of wandering, enduring Klaus and dozens like him, living in the worst conditions, you saved enough. You passed the guild's test. You became master. But you didn't know that your dream was, in fact, the biggest gilded trap of all. Becoming a master was the moment you willingly put the yoke on your own neck. You had reached the pinnacle of your profession, and it was just another prison, but this time the bars were made of gold. Gold that you owed. To open a proper workshop, you borrowed an enormous sum. The anvil alone, that solid block of steel you worshipped, cost more than a farmer earned in a year. The forge, the bellows, hundreds of hammers, tongs, chisels. This debt would follow you to your grave. And now you are a businessman. A good blacksmith does not make a good businessman. You had to deal with customers. Farmers who brought you broken hoes and haggled over every penny, pleading poverty while wearing clothes better than yours. Nobles who ordered elaborate decorative gates, promised everything, but then forgot to pay for months. You had to bow your head because you needed them. You hired your first apprentices. You watched the 7- and 8-year-old boys walk into your shop, and you saw yourself. You saw the fear in their eyes. You were responsible for their lives. When a child got burned, it was your fault. When he ruined a batch of iron, it was your money. And you knew you were training the very future competitors who would one day steal your customers. And then we talk about the guild. You thought it was a brotherhood for mutual protection. Wrong. It was a legal mafia. They regulated everything. What you were allowed to make, what price you had to sell it for to protect the big shots, and how many fees you had to pay. Annual fees, meeting fees, fees for some member's funeral. They controlled the market. And guess who sat on the guild council, inspecting the quality of your work? Klaus. Your old rival now had power. He'd come to your shop, frown, criticize your batch of horseshoes as substandard, and fine you an exorbitant amount. The work didn't get any lighter. As the master, you had to do the hardest jobs. Forging a wagon axle? Your job. Forge welding? Your job. The apprentices only did the simple tasks. The weight of the heaviest sledgehammer fell on your already tired shoulders. Your body, already ravaged after 20 years, now began to shatter at an accelerated rate. Your back ached constantly. Your hands began to lose their precision. You had climbed to the top, only to find nothing there but cold wind, isolation, and an unbearable burden. But the thing that really killed you wasn't the work. It was the invisible thing you breathed every day. At 40, you were a living relic. Your body was a catalog of occupational diseases. Let's talk about your lungs. What you inhaled every day wasn't just smoke. It was soot, coal dust, and worst of all, microscopic metal particles, iron, steel, and sometimes lead. Your lungs weren't designed to filter metal. These particles embedded themselves in your alveoli like thousands of tiny needles, causing chronic inflammation. Your cough wasn't dry anymore. You coughed up thick gray phlegm, sometimes streaked with blood. Doctors at the time called it consumption. We call it pneumoconiosis. Your lungs were disintegrating from the inside. Let's talk about your nervous system. Did you use lead for soldering or in soft alloys? Of course. Lead accumulated in your system over years. Your hands, once steady as rock, began to tremble. That wasn't old age. It was lead poisoning. Your memory began to fail. You forgot customers' names, forgot orders. Let's talk about the senses. The noise. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of hammer on anvil. 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, for 30 years. That sound exceeded 120 decibels. It didn't just hurt your ears, it killed the delicate hair cells in your cochlea. You started to go deaf. First, the high-frequency sounds. You could no longer hear birds sing. Then, voices. Your wife had to shout to talk to you. Your ears had a constant, agonizing ee sound. Your eyes? Every day you stared at something brighter than the sun. White-hot iron. The extreme heat and intense light dried your retinas. Your eyes were constantly bloodshot and your vision blurred. Cataracts weren't a possibility. They were an inevitability. Your body. Your joints screamed. Arthritis. Millions of shockwaves from the hammer traveled up your wrist, elbow, and shoulder. Your hands deformed. Your fingers locked into a permanent claw, unable to straighten, just like your father's. We call it contracture deformity. Your back was now bent, like a question mark. A lifetime of leaning over the anvil had permanently deformed your spine. You were no longer a man, you were a cripple. There was a time you were proud of your strength, but now you tried to hold your child, and your gnarled, scarred, blackened claws made it scream in fear. That was a pain worse than 1,000 burns. You had lost everything. Now you were 50. To live this long was a miracle. You were an old man, a shadow in your own workshop. You couldn't forge anymore. Your trembling hands couldn't hold a hammer. Your blurred eyes couldn't see the weld seam. You sat in the dark corner, on a wooden stool, coughing. The cough was your only companion now, a wet, painful sound. You watched your best apprentice, maybe your son, if he was foolish enough to follow the trade, take over. He was the master now, and you were the burden. Old customers came, looked at you with pity, then quickly turned to the younger man to discuss business. Your wife, if she was still alive, had become your nurse. She fed you, she cleaned you. The man who was once the pillar of the family was now completely dependent. The workshop, once your kingdom, was now your final prison. You just sat there, breathing the same air that was killing you, and waited. Death did not come gently. You didn't close your eyes and pass in your sleep. You died of suffocation. Your lungs, now hardened like a piece of scarred leather, could no longer absorb oxygen. You died in a violent coughing fit, trying to take one last clean breath that never came. You died in pain, in isolation, your ears still ringing with the ghostly sound of 40 years of hammering. Your funeral was quick. A few men from the guild came, out of obligation. A few customers came to see if the new smith would continue the business. Your family cried, but perhaps with a small sense of relief. The burden was lifted. Your name was forgotten before the dirt on your grave was even settled. A tragic, meaningless life? No. This is history's final plot twist. Your life was not meaningless. It was the foundation. You were forgotten, but your legacy was everywhere. The horseshoes you forged helped horses transport food that fed the city. The plows you repaired helped farmers create bread. The hinges you made were still holding the church doors. The nails you forged were holding the roofs over hundreds of heads. You, the filthy, hunched back, diseased blacksmith, were the one who kept the wheels of civilization turning. You didn't live a heroic life. You lived something even greater, an essential life. Your sacrifice was real. Your pain was real, and your contribution, though uncredited, is eternal. We stand on the shoulders of giants, even if those giants were bent and broken by the very weight they carried. And that is the flow of history. If this story of silent sacrifice touched you, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, because history isn't just about kings and battles. History is also the sweat, the blood, and the hammerfall of the anonymous people who built this world. Thank you for listening.